There's a pandemic of religious persecution that's impacting every faith community somewhere in the world. Because of that, people are suffering because of what they believe, of how they pray, of what they don't believe. It's leading to massive human rights violations, suffering, and challenges at a global level. For that reason, I think religious persecution really is the challenge of the 21st century. How do we live together with our differences in a pluralistic society, respecting the rights of others to believe as their conscience leads? We don't have to agree with those beliefs, but we agree that they have the right to believe them, and we agree to stand together in unity in defense of those rights. And until we find a way to do that, this pandemic is going to continue to victimize so many. And so we've got to find a way forward through this difficult time. When you think about religious persecution, it seems like a monolithic problem, but really there's different types of persecution, different shades of persecution. And if we're going to find solutions, we need to understand the different challenges. Much like different diseases require different medicines, different types of persecution require different responses.
I think it's important that we recognize that persecution has always an element of violence to it, or a threat of violence. And that's important to recognize, because I know some people will work with definitions and they would define it so broadly that it would include everything from being called a bad name to people looking at you askance because you have a different faith. And that's discrimination. That's bad. We shouldn't have those sort of things. But persecution has an element of a threat of violence to it. And we see around the world that there are hundreds of millions of people who are living in countries where there is a definite threat of violence. So for instance, take China. We don't know exactly. The estimates are somewhere between 50 and 150. My guess is closer to 150 than 50 million Christians. Most of them will not face a violent attack, but every single one of them is in danger of a violent attack. So it's a global issue. It's happening around the world. You know, the work that we do is in North Korea. It's in Iran. It's in Iraq. It's in Turkmenistan. It's in Egypt. It's in Nigeria. And we're seeing that many of the actors that are violating the rights of people, that are being violent, are transnational. They're sharing ideas. They're sharing ideologies, and they're sharing resources. And so we're talking about the global aspect, or the transnational aspect of violence based on religion, religious freedom being destroyed, religious freedom being violated, and we see that in many countries around the world. You see it in communist or former communist countries like China, where you have the mechanisms that are in place are a government that wants to have control, and it then wants to have control of anything that is outside of its control. And what is outside its control? Groups that meet together regularly and talk together. So it's not against religion per se. It's not anti, although officially it is, because it's an atheistic country with its ideology of communism. But that's not really the mechanism. The mechanism, the government wants to have control of everything. So any group that meets together regularly is a threat to them. And that is a Christian group, that could be a Muslim group, that could be a Buddhist group, any groups that meet together regularly. And so when you see persecution based on religion, it's not usually just one religion that's being persecuted. They're all being persecuted together, some more, some less. Some countries, though, might have a dominant religion. Iran, for instance, they have a dominant religion, Islam, and they have one form of Islam, Shia Islam, which is the majority. There is Sunni Islam also. And so that form of Islam is the dominant one. Sunnis can be in trouble. Baha'is are looked at as traitors to the country because they have a holy place which is in Israel. And of course, Christians who don't play along with the government are a threat to them.
Persecution is diverse. It's not one thing, and I think that's something that's sometimes difficult for people to understand. It does include torture. It does include violent, very obvious acts of violence and things like that. But it can also happen quietly. And so, for example, there's a group in Cuba of women who try to go to church every Sunday, but they're the relatives of political prisoners. And every single Sunday, they are dragged off the street into police cars, put in a hot car under the sun with the windows rolled up during the hours of Mass, and held there, which does amount to inhumane treatment or torture. When it happens week after week, obviously that takes a toll. Around the world, we see totalitarian governments of all stripes. We see militant nationalist groups rising up. And in many of those places, in some of those places, they have a direct hostility towards Christians and Christianity or towards religious groups in general. In some countries, it's more about control and civil society, and it may not be that they have a theological or a philosophical issue, but they see religious groups and religious people as wild card or something that's not controllable. And so in those cases, they're targeting them as well. In the 25 years I've worked at CSW, I'm not sure if I could say it's getting worse or better. It shifts in terms of where the hotspots are. We continue to see a real need for people to be speaking out, but to be doing it in an informed way and to be aware of what's happening, choosing a place or a people group or an area of the world to really educate oneself and be speaking out and praying for these people.